Howard, we have, I think most of the members of our Historic Archaeological Preservation Advisory Committee here, who I believe you met at the site visit. In addition to me, Ann Wentworth, an archaeologist. We have Marty Rosenblum, a preservation architect. Catherine Whitman, also an architect that's done a lot of work with preservation. Sebastian is our secretary, if you will. And Fred is coordinating the meeting. This meeting is being held at your request. We've all seen the response letter that you and Carrie prepared. And so I would open it by asking you to go ahead and offer whatever comments, questions you wish to.
We put together that response really just to continue the conversation a little bit further and give you a little bit of like where we were coming from with all of this. Particularly as it as this application involves the cultural landscape report and the sort of underlying foundation for that, the National Park Service standards for rehabilitation and historic preservation. So that's really the context of most of our responses to what was in your letter. I don't know if it's valuable for us to go through that point by point, or if you've all read it, if you would care to give some comment on our responses. I think the gist of what we were trying to say with that is both this, that we'd like to, we think that it's really the planning board's intention to use the cultural landscape report as a kind of like a logical foundation for reviewing this application, as well as several others within the town, so that there's a common language that everyone is using, and just approaching each area that we're proposing some kind of improvement or change. And then the other aspect of this is, while your letter was addressing certain aspects of the application, it did not mention a good number of the larger projects that we are proposing to do. And so I tried to point that out in the responses, that there's a significant amount of very carefully done historic preservation being proposed for this property. And much of it, and I think, is addressing some of the concerns that you had in your letter, particularly when you're describing the graceful sequence of spaces, the approach to the mansion house. That in particular is a very important aspect of our design and our proposal. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to restore the driveway, because we purchased two properties that were disconnected by subdivision, and we're reconnecting them. And that effort right there recreates a big part of that central core park of the original Ferncliff estate. And so to sort of augment that effort, we're doing what is nearly $1 million worth of planting of shade trees along the driveway that are using some of the historic record to determine where those trees should go. We're also, I think you've seen, we're opening up some of the views from what was the original mansion house location, and that is, this one view to the south in particular that has been closed up by overgrown trees. So, these are large efforts. There's a lot involved in doing that, and it's done very much with the intention of historic preservation. And so we were a little taken aback, I can say, when we saw in the letter a number of comments about what we perceive to be smaller items within the entire agenda. The questions about the mazes, questions about what's being proposed around Tea House. Tea House, which is already a very, very degraded part of the property due to effort work being done by a previous owner. So to turn that, all of those comments back to the cultural landscape report and the National Park Service standards, I think all of those things that we're doing, the larger ones that I just described, are very much what the National Park Service standards would want to see done there. And then those things, the smaller ones, the mazes, the small things being done at the tea house, are being done very carefully to fit within a different methodology governed by the standards. If preservation is one of their methodologies, they also have rehabilitation, which allows, it permits development within a park, bringing in something new, because they get it that functions change and time changes too, and there's other needs that can come in. So we've carefully placed all of those things in disturbed areas, so we're not further degrading the historic ground of that property. So not taking away anything that is extant that the Astors may have built. And then trying to characterize each of those things in a way that would be fitting for an estate of that era, and also that location being in the Hudson River Valley, where there's a lot of precedent for such estates. So in our mind, this application is as close to being on target for what the National Park Service is asking for in such the historic preservation and rehabilitation. Well, that's my pitch, and would love to hear how you think your comments fit within that.
Well, let me just start by saying that I appreciate the fact that this property represents an extraordinary opportunity for your client, but also for Rhinebeck. The thought that all of these parcels that have been subdivided and owned by different people over time, that so many of them could be reassembled and the core of the estate reestablished, recognizing that some pieces are not available at this time. But that is a remarkable thing. And so in a sense, that's raised the bar for the whole project, because the stated goal seems to be to recreate, as within reason, some of the experience that the original park had. And the cultural landscape report, of course, deals with the design landscape at some length. So I don't want you to think that we don't appreciate the scope and the scale, and frankly, the great expense involved in doing all this work. We certainly do. And we're happy to sort of answer questions or try to clarify aspects of our comments, but I will sort of open it up to our other committee members on the call and see if there are specific comments or questions or observations that they want to offer us. So with that, Anne, I think from archaeology, you felt there probably were no changes, but I'll let you confirm that you feel one.
Yeah, I had done the part that was kind of an addendum to the narrative on the committee response, point by point for the locations that we visited, noting where it needed archaeology and where it was okay to go ahead and been cleared. So I didn't really notice any comments that you had regarding that. I do think sometimes the term disturbed is a little confusing, because recent mechanical disturbance, large scale, means there's probably no archaeology, but previous disturbance, historical disturbance. For example, we had the little discussion about the Ferncliff Mansion site, and you said that the pavers were only going to be 4 inches down, which is fine. But if you're going to be excavating deeply, then an archaeologist would be able to learn something about that site from the disturbance, both of building the house and taking it down. But from what I saw, I looked over your comments and I didn't see anything that related to my specific remarks about archaeology.
Sure. If I may say, we have no objection to any of what was in your report. It's our understanding that the requirement for any of this archaeology investigation would be in the next phase of permitting. It's not part of the master plan, but when we get into site-specific applications, and we are fully willing to do whatever is necessary at that point in time.
Yeah, and I did talk to Mark about it too, so I think he's, he's pretty much aware of what needs to be done.
I think we're going to have some questions for you about certain areas because clearly the train line it's a little unusual in that its disturbance is in a thin, narrow line. So
right.
are we doing archaeology for the full area, or are we pinpointed it to a certain?
Yeah, I think I said for the line it probably didn't need it, but the area there where you're going to have the various buildings and the trestle and so on needed, and that was on the side of the carriage house, so there might be something of interest there.
Sure.
Okay.
We have no problems with doing any of that work.
Okay, thank you.
Catherine, did you have follow-up questions or comments for Howard and Terry?
My question is any of the work going on already? I saw on Saturday a big road crew in front of the Brindlebrook
what
driveway.
That is, what that is, well, there's two things going on out there. One of them is we are rebuilding the historic stone wall that was on River Road. That the zoning enforcement officer determined that no permits were required for that work since it's a repair of existing. So that's ongoing. Then we had a previous application to run three-phase power into the property, and that was along the current driveway for Astor Courts, which was part of the subdivision. So that work is just finishing up.
Thank you.
Marty Rosenblum. Comments? Yeah.
I think that I have a sufficient number of comments that I think that it would probably be best that I pass. I think they largely depend upon or are centered around semantics. And the town has looked to us to become a CLG or wants to go with a CLG, which means that we would give input. And the Secretary of Interior Standards are looking not for any way that meets the bar, but for the most sensitive way to meet the bar. And any time that I have gone to a historic hearing, which I did for 50 years with the Commission of Fine Arts in Washington, Old Georgetown, numerous other sites, they would cite what they felt the interior's position was, and then they would assist in interpreting it, which takes dialogue. I don't think that one can have dialogue. First of all, preservation is not totally objective. It has to do with interpretation, but I have a basic difficulty with what we were saying being categorized as subjective determinations. The amount of expertise on this committee, be it historical, archaeological, architectural, or otherwise, is free for the client to use. We are all here to do the best for the community, as you pointed out, Warren. We are volunteers giving our time. We are thrilled to see this happen. We make recommendations. They are not arbitrary. They are not subjective. And to look at the Secretary of Interior Standards as a checklist and say, yep, they say we can do this. Yeah, they say we can put in a driveway. Yeah, they say we can enlarge a terrace, is not really allowing us to help which is at least the reason that I came on the committee, and I hope the reason that everyone else came on the committee. So there really is no dialogue. It's did it, meets it, we can do this, we are within our right. And I think it's all culminated when it says that it is a private property. We're well aware that it's a private property. And by the way, even if it's a National Register property, the only time the federal government gets involved is with a 106 review. Unfortunately, we have very little preservation teeth in this country, but history belongs to everyone, and that's what we're trying to preserve. So I think that when one says we're within our rights and one puts us at bay by saying this is private property, I think that the conversation is pretty closed. That's what I have to say.
I would only respond to that by saying this conversation is happening because we requested it. We did on our side, and the last planning board hearing, and Kathy was very good in putting this together for us. The town did not put this together for us. The town does not make any connection between an application and your committee, which I think I agree is a problem. That there should be dialogue. I don't disagree with you, but other than our asking to have this phone call, we wouldn't be having this dialogue. So I think let's be a little bit fair here.
But we're dealing with a rebuttal that says it's private property.
No, I did not say that. I did not say that. Those are your words.
I'll find it for you.
I said it because it is private property, and it was said in the context that when there are in fact subjectivities in interpreting the standards. The standards are not the guidelines that you wish they were. They are not prescriptive. They are open to interpretation, as you just said. And so there are multiple ways of interpreting, and there are multiple ways of interpreting something sensitively. And there is a matter, especially when we're talking about rehabilitation and we're talking about working on a site like the tea house, and this was in reference specifically to the work that you guys had asked to be halted on the tea house to reconsider another design option. I think we have been sensitive to the needs of the town, and I'm a historian. I care about history. I'm a landscape historian. I care about landscape history. But I also recognize that we could put out, 10 different designs, and each one of you on the committee might feel differently about it. They could all meet the standards. They could all meet the standards sensitively.
There's no doubt.
And so by saying it's a private property wasn't to like throw down the gauntlet to say, the case is closed. It was to say that if this were a public park, I think that public opinion would hold more weight. This is an important resource to the town as part of this important cultural landscape. But there's also a reason that the owner of the property can also have an opinion that has weight in this matter.
I don't know that the owner of the property has had an opinion because, of course, we haven't spoken to him. But I will reiterate that hopefully this property will last longer than this owner, as owners, as we know, come and go. And so our job is to do the least damage possible. Let me try and go a little bit further on the tea house as case in point. It was originally a major site because it was the site of the house. It was where everything happened. And also the two driveways were never meant to connect to each other because they circulated around the house. So we have an uncomfortable connection, which you're making the best you can. But I will say that when Astor created the tea house there, he created something to take advantage of the view. and something that maybe that commemorated the site, but it was a small gesture and it was moved off the driveway. It may have had gardens, may have had some other things, but it was small. It has gotten bigger and bigger, not at your behest before you got there. Now what we have marching toward the historic park is, first we have a house. I'm not even concerned about the terrace that you're expanding on the rear. Now we're putting a garden in front of it, which is a parking court right now. Then we have a pool, which you're re-landscaping, and then you're going to do something else. So where there was something that one would hope would be suppressed and minimized, if you're going to the last Astor period, in which the casino became the big gesture and the tea house was a counterpoint, when you now get to that tea house, there is so much going on there. There is so much development. It is so elaborate. You feel you've arrived at the house itself. It's a huge gesture. And nothing seems to be, other than you did point out that moving the driveway, you'll be opening some view because of screening, but nothing is done. And I know you're not required to make it smaller. You are not required to take down anything that was done prior to your ownership. However, you're making it bigger and bigger and bigger and more significant with gardens and fences and labyrinths. This is supposed to be, as I said, originally it was important, then it became a delicate counterpoint, and now it's neither. Okay, it's a huge, huge gesture in the middle of the park. So I understand what you're saying, okay? We're looking at differently, and I am saying it would be nice to do the least harm. So as I said, I am one member of a committee, but my views are not, in my mind, subjective. And fun and play are not a response to me as a reason to do things. I think things should be based. If anyone had interest in doing right by this property, there would be a momentary pause on this to have a real discussion. And Warren had to cajole me to speak today, because I said to Warren, when I got this letter from the two of you, I said, this isn't a discussion, this is a rebuttal. I'm not going to even talk because I don't want to draw it out. I don't waste my time. Warren said to me, if you want anything to come through, it's going to have to come through from you. I'm not going to do it for you. And so, Warren, I have spoken, but I think the gesture is too big at the tea house. It's right in the middle of the park. It's a multi-million-dollar complex there between the house and the pool and the labyrinth and everything else. None of it based in history. Yes, they can do it, but in my mind, really, truly a tragedy. You get there and you say, this is a multi-million-dollar house. This is it. You know, and as I said, it never was that way historically. It was, and there are three issues. It was first a big house, then it was two separate properties, which we are happy it's not. Excuse me. First, it was a large house, then it was a counterpoint, and then it was two properties. Okay, now we have two large houses, two large gestures with formal gardens and stuff on the property. I mean, to thoroughly confuse everyone into the interpretation of history. So that's it. I've said it.
I would like to point out a positive that has come out of the cultural landscape report. And that is a pretty major adjustment in your plans as had been originally proposed. And one of those has to do with the circulation. And this has to do with your comments about the tea house, because one of the major gifts to the tea house site is actually the removal of the non-historic driveway from the center of the historic lawn. So the Astors never had cars driving up to the tea house. They never had this straight driveway, nor the parking court, nor the subterranean parking. That's coming out completely, which is a major adjustment to this complex that has been severely compromised by previous owners. So you're right, it's compromised, but I honestly believe that these proposals by Hollander Design mitigates a huge amount of damage that has been done. Secondly, removing the non-historic driveway from the center of the park, which, as Charles Birnbaum pointed out, is the most important landscape feature of this design landscape. That is a major gesture, which was not originally contemplated. And so
A huge victory for everyone.
it is, it's great. And so I understand there will be parts of this plan that don't appeal to everyone, but on the whole, I think that we have, as Howard mentioned earlier, created some grander gestures that were overlooked, I think, in the letter that we received from HAPAC. And perhaps we felt a little slighted that some of those larger gestures were unrecognized and some of the smaller details were maybe given more accord than we thought they might.
Yeah, and I think I might just also, just as a response, I think in all historic preservation, there's a problem that occurs when you are dealing with the different function, a contemporary function inside an historic property. Yes, it was just a tea house. It was a counterpoint to the larger casino building, but it was converted into a residence at some point. The town allowed that, and it does meet all of the town's zoning code as a residence currently. I think all that we are doing with the tea house is rectifying some of the just functional mistakes that were made for that as a residence, and I think the owner has every right to make these corrections, and moving the parking court out of the front of the house is primarily because to get to the swimming pool, which is pre-existing, we didn't build it, we're simply renovating it. That walk from the house to the pool had to go through the parking court. This is a multi-million-dollar property, and I don't see why one would object to their wanting to move through a more appealing landscape between the house and the pool. So that's why we propose moving the parking court and putting in a formal garden, of which we do know from historic record there were 2 such formal gardens in exactly that location. So, I don't think that that's exacerbating the problem here. And yes, we're putting, we move the parking court north, but as far as the its effect on the true core of the property, which is that great lawn area, it's not at all visible from that location. It will be properly screened. It's a small effect on that property, given all of the negatives that have happened on that property in the past number of decades. So I don't want to say that it's an exaggeration to say that we are doing greater harm, but it's I honestly don't believe we're doing greater harm to that portion of the property. And since it's a residence, I think you have to allow it to function as a residence, and it should have all of the rights of every other individual in the town with a residence, and they can use it as a residence. Taking away some of the parts that's being suggested is to take away some of that as of right functionality. That's a hard thing to do. And so I'm not sure that historic preservation is the reason to limit the functionality of their property.
As an architect with an architecture degree, a license, and a preservation degree, and I think Kelly would agree, although her expertise is in landscape, the two of them can coexist. It's always a matter of striving for the best result. This is the best.
I believe that's what I'm trying to say is I believe we have done so.
And I think we were trying to get you to revisit feeling that, at least on my part, that there are some opportunities that will be missed. And the difficult thing of this, and it's not our purview, but it is this huge project, and you have the ability and the client has the wherewithal to do it right. And it's just sad. That's the
This is exactly what I had meant by the difference between subjectivity and objectivity. I do believe that's a subjective statement, and I don't think it's doing any harm. And I think everything that we're proposing is in a proper character for such an estate and such a specific problem as at the tea house. That's a matter of opinion. We can argue that endlessly.
I think in our present form as a committee that only advises the Planning Commission, we've done everything we can, and you're absolutely right. I will tell you that if we were a commission, okay, it would be absolutely different, okay? And these things would get revisited, and they are worthy of discussion. But you're right, you're totally within your rights to do as you wish on it. It's not objective.
I'm going to object to the characterization that we're doing something that is harmful here. I just do not agree with that.
That is, again, as you said, subjective.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sorry I'm late to the meeting. Did I miss anything? No, apparently not.
So I would ask Howard and Carrie, you've heard from all of us, more from some than others, but is there anything more we can tell you or you need to tell us at this particular point? It's been pointed out, we are purely advisory to the planning board and they do what they will. Yeah.
Right. Well, one thing I would say, and this is something that I might want to also say to Michael Trimble, in order for your committee to be effective, you do need to be very much a part of the process. And I actually think Carrie and I would have appreciated having more communication with all of you through this, and that it happened in this kind of fragmentary and somewhat short-circuited way is something that could be addressed by the town. We are actually at the end of our permit process. This last hearing was our fourth hearing on this, and we're going into probably two more. This committee probably should be involved much earlier in the process.
Here.
Yes, it was clear from the comments in the letter that you all have a tremendous wealth of information, and we certainly would have benefited from having that earlier in the process. And the engagement between the planning board and HAPAC was entirely opaque to us, and how to engage or whether to engage was completely unclear. So it is a shame that this comes at the end of a very long process. And I do hope, as Howard said, that this can inform the way HAPAC works going forward with the town, because you guys are the experts in your town. So that invaluable information for anybody working in Rhinebeck.
I would just point out, Carrie and Howard both, that this committee is only 1 year old. And when it was formed literally at the beginning of the pandemic. And so it has had, I think Warren could address this better than I, but so could all of the other committee members. It's had a bit of a ragged start because of that, but we're playing catch up, and we certainly appreciate any suggestions you might have with regard to the process, procedures, or substance of what the committee addresses.
Well, we're a little accustomed in this entire application to being the guinea pigs, in a sense, on a number of changes to how things are done within the town. The cultural land, we are the first project to actually do a cultural landscape report, as far as I understand. So there's been a big learning curve on all of that as well. So totally understand where you're coming from, Kathy.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Warren?
No, I mean, everything everyone has said is correct. This is a relatively new committee. We're still feeling our way and having our role defined and redefined. But again, by the same token, you are dealing with arguably one of the most important properties in the town of Rhinebeck, and one of great significance in the history of the Hudson Valley and development of our country and the people that built along the river. So, you know, it's sort of an interesting confluence of events, and I'm glad that we are here and able to offer the insight and suggestions and observations that we have. But I think we all agree that had we been involved in the process earlier, we all would have benefited more as a result. And we're going to count on the planning board to take your comments and our comments and do their best to approve a project that's going to work for you and your client and for the town of Rhinebeck. Any other comments?
No, that's, I think I've said enough.
Okay, then I think if there are no objections, we can conclude the call and adjourn this meeting. Thank you.